Terrorist Incident Response Curriculum Guides. It's a safety officer PDF, which starts up there in the top corner is a response training consideration awareness of operations, the core and mission specifics of hazardous materials technicians, a specialist employee, hazardous material specialist, incident commander, hazardous material officer and safety officer, BLS responder, ALS responder, hospital first receiver, Appendix A, related standards, Appendix B, NIMS, ISCS, Appendix C, special topics. Safety officer hazardous material incident introduction to two training categories combining in this section. The first safety officer hazardous material incident is defined in OSHA. The second, the hazardous material safety officer is defined in NFPA. Safety officer hazardous material incidents as defined in OSHA shall be trained to meet operated OSHA regulatory requirements to identify and evaluate hazards, provided direction to safety operations of emergency response sites. The hazardous material site officer of defined of the NFPA shall train to meet all competency of first responder awareness operational technical levels and competency in this section. They also shall receive additional training to meet applicable Department of Transportation and Environmental Protection Agencies, EPOs, Occupational Safety Health Administration, OSHA, other appropriate state, local, and provisional occupational and safety regulatory requirements. The definition of safety officer hazardous material incident OSHA, the hazardous material safety officer of NEFPA, are those persons who work with incident commanders and also called in incident management systems to ensure and recognize safety practices are followed within the hazardous material branch. Safety officer of hazardous material incidents OSHA has the authority to alter, suspend, terminate activities to involve dangerous conditions and safety. Other officers and incident commanders actions that will need to take place in order to correct the hazard. The hazard material safety officer of the NFPA will be called on to provide technical advice, assistance regarding safety issues. The hazardous material officer, incident safety officers, hazardous material incidents training audience. The training audience for both safety inspectors, hazardous material incidents, OSHA, and other hazardous material safety officers in the NFPA. A relatively small number of technical advanced and safety officers of hazardous material incidents OSHA are as a person within potentially qualified incident commander level of sufficient hazardous material knowledge to identify risk needed interventions. Training audience should include existing members of hazardous material response team who experience training at a technical level who have demonstrated sufficient potential warrant training and subsequent assignment hazardous material sufficient safety officer methodology. The rest safety officer of hazardous material OSHA hazardous material incidents OSHA hazardous material safety officer and the FPA. The training is being conducted combination of a classroom instructing using training lecture, small group activities, field exercises involving group practice and simulated emergencies. There should be strong emphasis of field training including incident operations safety evaluation problem solving to include real-time practice identifying implementation of safety interventions during incident scene operation. Hazardous material items content should be synthesized to student activities requiring analysis of incident information to determine safe plans of action requirement assessment of performance of hazardous material team members during operations to determine the need. Safety interventions training should include the instruction modules, student walkthroughs, and structural procedures under stress and competence and achieve and critique and corrective instructions. Essential refresh training should include one technical information updates, two critical ability to analyze and assist in incident and system planning and safe response, three critical incident scenes of safety evaluation and intervention skills using simulated emergencies. Summary of safety officers, hazardous material incidents, OSHA, and hazardous material safety officer, NFPA. The small numbers in the audience, the safety officer of OSHA responded to incident command level, potential assignment of incident safety officers, and NFPA. Responders of technical level, potential, and assignment for the hazardous safety officer. Prerequisite prior training demonstrated competency to awareness of operational technical incident command levels. Training, no specific length of training is recommended. Commonly used in length of training should be sufficient to allow students to achieve competence. Classroom, lab, field exercise format requirements within the emphasize of real-time field simulation requiring practicing developing safe response, identifying safety problems during the implementation response plan, competency analyzing the incident, insisting developing a safety response, assisting testing, implementation of response plan, its evaluation of responsive safety plan, roll up problems, identifying intervention, refresher technology, information using updates, use simulating emergency refreshing ability and analyze incident and developing safe response plans, using simulated emergency refreshing ability to evaluate response, identifying safety problems and need interventions. Federal requirements for safety officers, hazardous material incidents. No federal specified training requirements for hazardous material safety officers, but OSHA's 29 CFR 1910 120 LQ3 7 through 8 specifies certain performance competent requirements of the safety officer hazardous material incident employers as required to ensure the employee demonstrates competency in these skills defined. Although the safety officer were initially defined in OSHA advising incident commander, only the subsequent OSHA interpretation of the knowledge that there may be multiple safety officers in the incident scene and advising several levels of command. 7. The individual charge of the ICS shall designate the safety officer who is knowledgeable and operational implemented emergency response site specific responsibility to identify, evaluate hazards and provide direction within respect of safety operational emergency on hand. V8 8. When activities are judged in safety officers of the IDA-LH or to involve imminent danger conditions, then safety officers shall have authority to alter, suspend, terminate in those actions. Safety official will immediately inform the individual charging the ICS of any actions needed to be taken to correct the hazardous and its emergency response. OSHA's 2970 CFR 190.120 Q3 7 through 8. So SOA gives simulated incident involving hazardous material, demonstrate the ability to identify hazardous incident, provided direction to development and safe response. SOB gives simulated response to an incident involving hazardous material, demonstrated the ability to identify, evaluate unsafe activities and condition involving imminent danger. SOC giving identifying unisafe condition, simulated response to an accident, hazardous material, demonstrates the ability to determine appropriate interventions, including the altering, suspending, termination, selected response activity, coordination of those interventions. Individual charges, ICS, recommendation, training objectives. The following training objectives, recommendation, hazardous material safety officers, training the primary source of material, NFPA 472, chapters 11, competency of hazardous material safety officer, training objectives from other sources noted, discussions for nationality for inclusion beyond special topic sections at the end of the response guide. Hazardous material safety officers shall be trained to meet all competency, first response awareness, operational, technical levels competency in these sections. They shall recover additional training and meet EPA and OSHA and other appropriate state, local, provisional, occupational health and safety regulatory requirements. Objective and identification legend. The identification of this objective is used in the document. It matches the identification code used in the course assessment references aware.1.1 NFP 421. Use of identification origin of the objective usually directly into the NFP, in some cases of the others noted. OSHA. If references to OSHA are cited in the following objectives where they applicable according to the following nomenclature. OSHA 29 CFR 19101.20 Q3 7 and 8. OSHA SO through A to C. Safety hazards of hazard material incidents. SO1 analyzing the incident. SO 1.1 determining magnitude problem in terms of safety given scenarios involving hazardous material WMD incidences. The hazardous material and safety officers shall observe a scene, will review and evaluate hazardous response information as it pertains to safety of all personnel. Hazardous material group of branch 711 SO 1.1.1. Hazardous material safety officer shall explain the basic toxicology, principle, relative assessment, treatment of personnel exposed to hazardous material WMD, including the following: acute, delayed toxicity, response routes of exposure, toxic materials, synergistic efforts. The SO 1.1.2 hazardous material safety officer shall identify at least 3 conditions of the hazardous from flammability would require chemical protective clothing with thermal protection. As in NFP 11.2.1.2 OSHA SOA SO113. Hazardous Material Safety Officer shall identify at least three conditions the personnel would not allow to be entered in a hot zone. And that starts as the NFPA 11.2.1.3, OSHA SOA 1.1.4. Given the names of five hazardous materials, WMD at least three for reference sources. Hazardous Material Safety Officer identifying physical, chemical properties and their potential impact safety personnel and incidental involving each of the partial agents of OSHA SOA 1 and 11.2.14. SO 115, given the names of hazardous material, at least the degrees for reference source of identifying health and concern with the potential impact of safety, health, and personnel incidents involving each of the materials. OSHA 70A. 71.16, given the name of five hazardous materials, description 5 containing hazardous material safety officer identifying five hazardous physical conditions would impact the safety and personnel and incidentally involving each of the materials. OSHA 70A. 11.2.1.6 planning. SO 2.2 planning and response. SO 2.1 identifying safety precautions, potential action options given scenario involving hazardous material. WMD incidences with hazardous material safety officers shall assist the hazardous material in within the developing a site safety control plan to respond within the capabilities available. Response personnel, protective equipment, and control equipment. OSHA SOA and NFPA 11.3.1. This SO 2.1.2 identifying specific safety precautions to observe with while mitigation each of the hazard conditions, and NFPA 11.3.1.1. OSHA 70A 702.1.2 identifying precautions associated with search rescue missions as hazardous waste materials. WMD incidences of NFPA 11.3.1.2 SOSH SO S.O.2.2 providing recommendations regarding safety considerations given scenarios involving hazardous material. Hazardous material safety officers shall provide incident safety officers, hazardous material incident commanders of observation, basic recommendations regarding consideration safety on site. Hazardous material safety officers shall develop recommendations inside commander regarding safety consideration, hazardous risks of each hazardous material. WMD container identification. NFPA 11.3.2.2 OSHA SOA. 1C assisting the development of the site safety control plan and inclusion of the incidental action plan. The NFPA 11.3.3 OSHA 70A. Given the scenarios involving hazardous material, WMD incidents, hazardous material safety officer shall assist the incident safety officer, hazardous material officer developing the site safety control plan, including the incident action plan. SO231 identifying importance with a list of 5 benefits of pre-emergency planning relating to the specific sites. NFP 11.3.3A OSHA 70A. SOA 232 identifying the name of 5 hazard precautions observed when appropriating 5 hazard material. WMD incidences. NFP PA 11.3-3B OSHA 70A. 70.233 list of elements of safety consideration. NFPA 11.3.3 OSHA SOA. SO 234 given a pre-incident involving hazardous material. WMD containers developing safety consideration of the incident. And NFPA 11.3.3D OSHA 708 70235 providing recommendations regarding safety, reviewing and planning of action. FPA 11.3.4 OSHA 708 given proposed action of the incident involving one of the hazardous material. WMD container identifying incident safety officer, hazardous material officer, incident commander of safety precaution incident action plan. SO 236 ensure the safety consideration proposed incident action plan consistent with the emergency response plan and or organization standard operating procedures of the NFPA 11.3.4A OSHA 70A. 70237 make recommendations and incident commander of the safety consideration proposed incident action plan. 11.3.4B OSHA 70A. 7024 reviewing selection personnel protective equipment given scenario involving hazardous waste material. W incident Hazardous material safety officer demonstrate the ability to review the selection of the personal protective equipment required for the given action of the option 1135 says OA and 70241 identifying safety consideration personnel working personal protective action NFPA 1135A OSHA 708. Safety officer, hazardous material officers, SO242, give them the names of 5 different hazardous material WMD and a chemical compatibility chart of the chemical protective clothing, identify the chemical protective clothing within the provided protection, and identify the hazardous to wear each of the 5 substances of 1135B of the NFPA, OSHA 708A, 7.0243, give the names of 5 different hazardous material, identify personnel protective equipment options of specified response options, NFPA 1135C, OSHA 708, 70242, SO244, identifying recommendations, downing, duffing, and using of personnel protective equipment, providing authorized use of jurisdiction for use in hazardous materials, WMD response activities, SO25 standard safety officer 25 reviewing and proposed documentation plans to given the site specific documentation proceeds a hazardous material officer incident commander a scenario involving simulated hazardous material WMD incident reviewing the plan identifying safety consideration prior implementation incident action plan. Safety officer 26 ensuring proper provisions of proper emergency medical given scenario involving hazardous material WMD incident hazardous material safety officer shall review emergency medical services procedures to ensure the responsive personnel and the provider medical SO261 identifying elements required to the emergency medical services plan, SO262 identifying importance on site and medical monitoring programs, SO263 identifying resource transportation carrier the injured personnel exposed to hazardous material WMD. Implementation planning and response. Safety officer 3. Safety officer 3. Performance of the duties of hazardous material safety officer given the scenario involving hazardous material WMD incidents. Hazardous material safety officer shall perform the duties, positions, manner consistent with the emergency response plan or standard authorization as the NFPA 11.4-1 and SO8 and OSHA standard safety officer A, B, and C. SO3 3.1.1 identify the duties of hazardous material safety officer define emergency response plan standard authorization NFPA 11.4.1A OSHA 70 safety officer A, B, and C. Standard officer safety officer 3.1.2 demonstrate performance duties of the hazardous material safety officer determine emergency response plan and or standard authorization procedures. Safety officer 3.2 monitoring safety response personnel given the scenarios involving hazardous materials W incident and hazardous material safety officer shall ensure the personnel perform their task safe manner, identifying safety consideration controlling function, identifying the safety site and control plan. SO321 identifying the safety operation and participation required following hazardous materials WMD incident as stated in emergency response plan standard operating procedures. Safety officer 3.2.2 identify the following factors influencing heat, cold, stress, hazardous material response personnel activity levels, duration, entry, environmental factors, hydration level, personnel protective equipment, physical fitness. Safety officer 3.2.3 identify methods of minimizing potential harm from heat and cold stress. 3.2.4 safety officer identifying the safety consideration within the minimize psychological and physical stress on personnel working in personnel protective equipment. Safety officer 325 describe 5 conditions where it might be redundant to withdraw for the hazardous material WMD incident. Sections safety officer 3.3 conducting safety briefings giving scenarios involving hazardous material WMD incident citing control planning. Hazardous material safety officer shall conduct the safety briefings for performing functions identifying the incident action plan. Safety officer 331 hazardous material safety officer shall be able to demonstrate procedure conducting a safety briefing personnel incident involving the hazardous material WMD container identifying specified emergency response standard authorization procedures. SO4 and 3.4 implementation enforcement consideration given involving hazardous materials WMD incident cited safety control hazardous material safety officer shall assist the incident commander, the incident safety officer, hazardous material is in implementing and enforcing consideration safety officer 341 identify whether the boundaries established in the control zone are clearly marked consistent with the safety consideration and are maintained. Safety officer 342 identify one site medical monitor required authorizing having jurisdiction as performs. Safety officer 343 given an entry team, backup team, decontamination team wearing personnel protective equipment, identifying each team is properly protected, prepared, and safely performed an assigned task. 3431 identifying whether the selection of clothing and equipment consists of safety control plans. Section 7. Safety officer 3432 identify whether each examination has the clothing bearing integrated in equipment to ensure correct working order. Safety officer 3433 identifying protective clothing and equipment have been done in accordance with the organization's standard of operating procedure manufacturer recommendations. Safety officer 344 identify each person entering the hot zone a specific task assessment, understanding assessment, and properly trained to perform assigned tasks as his working designated partner at all times in the assessment. Safety officer 345 identifying backup team is prepared at all times immediately entry to the hot zone during any entry team operations. And safety officer 346 identifying decontamination process specified safety consideration in place before any entry into the hot zone. Safety officer identifying each person into the hot zone, each tool or piece of equipment decontamination in accordance with the safety consideration degree of hazardous material weight WMD exposure. 7. Safety officer 348 demonstrate operative procedure for recording names of the individuals existing and exiting the hot zone and specify on local emergency response plan organizational standard authorization. Standard officer 349 identify three considerations that can minimize secondary contamination. Safety officer 35 maintaining communication given the scenario involving hazardous material WMD incident and safety control plan. Hazardous material safety officers shall maintain route emergency communication incident command structure at all times during incident. 3 section safety officer 351 identify three types of communication system of hazardous material WMD incitement. Identify whether the person assigned to the purpose of a hot zone understand emergency alerting response procedures specified in safety consideration prior to entry of the hot zone. Safety officer 306 monitoring status given simulated hazardous material WMD incident safety control plan. Hazardous material safety officer monitor routine emergency communication incident command structure of times during an incident. Section 361 hazardous material safety officer shall ensure the entry team may be regularly commute status of their work assessment of the hazardous material. Officer 7 safety officer 37 implementing exposure monitoring implementing exposure monitoring giving a scenario involving hazardous material WMD incident at the safety site control plan. Hazardous material safety officer shall assist an incident commander, incident safety officer of the hazardous officer implementation and exposure monitoring. Safety officer 38 verifying exposure monitoring. Hazardous material safety officer shall identify the exposure monitoring personal environmental specified emergency response plan and standard authorization procedure safety site and control plan consideration perform. Safety officer 4 evaluating progress. Safety 41 identifying deviations from safety consideration and other dangerous situations. Given a scenario involving hazardous materials WMD incidents, give deviation site safety control activities of plan a hot warm zone dangerous conditions. Hazardous material safety officer shall take the corrective action as necessary to ensure safety health of the person in his hot or warm zone. Identify those actions deviate the safety control plan otherwise accepted safety operational practice organization and known policy applicable occupational safety health laws regulation codes and standards and guidelines. Safety officer 412 identify dangerous conditions develop and identify during work a hot warm zone threatening the safety health and persons in the zone. Safety officer 413 identifying signs and symptoms psychological physical stress and personnel wearing physical protective equipment. Safety officer 42 taking corrective actions given scenario involving hazardous materials WMD and incidences given deviations from safety control plan activities both hot and warm zone dangerous conditions. The hazardous material safety officer shall take corrective actions as necessary to ensure the safety health of persons person in a hot and warm zone. Safety Officer 421, send emergency communication, receive emergency communication for the incident safety officer, emergency entry team, hazardous material officer, other appropriate regarding safety practices and conditions. Safety Officer 4211, given hazardous situation condition to develop and identify the following initial hot zone and demonstrate the application of emergency alerting procedure specified in site safety control and communicating hazardous and emergency response information affected personnel. Safety Officer 4212, given demonstrated an emergency alter via hand signal by a member of the entry team operating the hot zone, identifying meeting of the signal and specified safety and control. Safety Operation 4212, define procedure alterators suspending to terminate activity that can be judged unsafe and unsafe. Specified emergency response plan, standard authorization procedures. Standard authorization procedures demonstrate procedure, notify appropriate individual unsafe action directive and alternative safe actions in accordance with safe consideration organization standard operation procedures. Demonstrate the procedure suspending termination and action can present all imminent hazardous condition in accordance with safety controlling plan and standard authorization procedures. SO5 termination incident says standard authorization. Standard officer, safety officer 51, providing reports and documentation of given the scenario hazardous material WMD incidents. The hazardous material safety officer shall complete and submit the reports, documentation, follow-up required hazardous material safety officer safety officer 511, identify safety reports supporting documentation required local emergency response plan standard authorization period. Safety officer 5.1.2, demonstrate completion safety reports required for the emergency response standard authorization procedures. Safety officer 513, describe importance of personal exposure records. Safety Officer 52, describe the hazard material branch of group personnel scenarios involving hazardous material WMD incidents. Hazardous material safety officers shall debrief hazardous material branch group personnel regarding a site-specific occupational safety health issues. And Safety Officer 521, hazardous safety officer shall be able to identify 5 health safety topics to be addressed in an accident incident debriefings. Safety Officer 522, hazardous material safety officer shall be able to demonstrate proper procedure briefing material branch group personnel regarding site-specific occupational safety health areas of concerning specified safety control plan, emergency response plan, and the organization standard authorization procedure. Section 5.3, assisting for the incident criteria, the given scenarios involving hazardous materials WMD incident site safety control plan. The hazardous material safety officer provides safety health related critical observations. The activities were performed in hot warm zone during the incident. Section 504, information prevented given in safety control hazardous material safety officer reports in area involving hazardous material waste WMD incident. Hazardous material safety officers demonstrate procedure verbal presenting following information in accordance with emergency response standard operation procedure. Safety health related critical observation activities where they are performed in hot warm zone during the incident. Recording violation safety site control plan generally accepted as safety operation procedure organization policy applicable occupational safety health laws, regulations, code, standard, and guidelines. Injuries, deaths occurred on it as a result of responsibly unforeseen dangerous conditions that developed during the incident. Injuries, death, or as occurred result of violation safety coordination consideration generally accepted safety operations procedure organizational policies applicable occupational safety health law, regulations, code, standards, guideline, the proper course of action that would be prevented injuries, death, and occurred result of safety violations, and identify the proper reaction that would be prevented injury, death, and has occurred as a result of safety violations. Definitions, weaknesses, site safety control, local emergency response plan, organizational standards, organizational procedures that were during the following incident. And that is response 17. I'm going to go right back up to the top. Hazardous material safety officer guidelines, material incidences, hazardous material terrorist incident response curriculum guidelines. And it's marked as safety officer